In my last video, I covered Tyreback Zumishbek's dominant performance at the Bill Farrell, where we saw him hit a variation of the front Uchimada on numerous occasions. In this video, we'll take a closer look at that move. The front Uchimada is commonly employed by Mongolian combat athletes who use it in freestyle wrestling, judo, sumo, and especially in Mongolian folk wrestling. The move involves lifting an opponent off their feet and using a leg to help elevate and rotate the opponent's hips. A few important elements of the move. First are the grips. The thrower will need to obtain grips to facilitate the lift and rotation. The specific grips will depend on the sport. For instance, in sumo, judo, and Mongolian wrestling, the thrower will typically have at least one grip on the belt or briefs. In freestyle wrestling, the preferred grip is typically a body lock. Once the grips are obtained, the next element is the hip load up. For this, the thrower will bring their hips close to the opponent's hips, win the inside position with their inside hip, and use their grips plus hip extension to load the opponent's hips and lift them off their feet. Depending on the thrower may use the thigh of their inside leg to assist with the hip load up, or they may load the hips without assistance from the leg. In any event, once the hips are loaded and the opponent is lifted off their feet, the third element will be for the thrower to use their inside thigh to elevate the opponent's inside thigh. This will rotate the opponent's hips and in turn help rotate them to their back. Let's pause there because I know what some of you might be thinking. No, it won't smash the opponent's nuts so long as you are elevating the thigh, which in addition to not inflicting pain on your opponent, provides better leverage to rotate their hips. The last element is the pivot. This typically occurs simultaneously with the inside thigh elevation and involves the thrower pivoting away from the direction of the thigh elevation, similar to how you would do on a conventional Uchimada or really any twisting throw. The pivot is both a change of direction and a contortion of the head and torso. The pivot increases the effectiveness of the inside thigh elevation and thus causes more hip rotation and also helps rotate the opponent's upper body so that both the opponent's hips and upper body are pulled into a horizontal position. Now let's take a closer look at some examples of the front Uchimada to see how these four elements, the grip, the hip load, the thigh elevation, and the pivot are applied. This first one is by Narmandak from Mongolia at the 2022 World Championships. Narmandak transitions from a double leg to a body lock and brings his hips in for the hip load up, which lifts the opponent off both feet. With his right hip inside, Narmandak uses his right thigh to elevate the opponent's left thigh, while simultaneously pivoting to his left. Note the angle change of the foot. Also note the contortion of Narmandak's head and torso down and to the left, which rotates the opponent out of his upright posture and forces all of his weight onto his right leg, where he can be easily off-balanced. Depending on factors like the degree of hip elevation and rotation, as well as the opponent's height, forcing them onto one leg in this standing split type position is where the throw is often finished from. Here's one from our guy Zumishbek. Seatbelt underhook with his right arm, punches his left arm inside to cinch the body lock, immediately steps inside with his right leg to load the hips, elevates the inside thigh, and pivots left to force the opponent onto one leg and into a horizontal posture where he can drive in and easily off balance for the finish. Check it out again. Here's another one from Z. This time Z goes underhook throw by to get the seatbelt underhook, cinches the body lock while stepping inside with his right leg, loads the hips, elevates the inside thigh, pivots left, and finishes with impact. Last one we'll see from Z, and it's a beauty. Duck under to double unders to body lock, steps his right leg inside, and on this one gets massive hip load up. Note how Z tilts his head back and to the left, which allows him to shelve the opponent's hips on top of his just before he brings his right leg through for the thigh elevation. Due to this increased hip elevation plus the hip rotation, the opponent is unable to post his right foot to the mat and is launched to the ground in devastating fashion. Here's one of Z's teammates from Kyrgyzstan hitting it. I like showing this clip because it's not a particularly polished application of the move, but it still gets the job done. Double unders to body lock, strong hip load and lift, uses the left thigh to elevate the opponent's inside thigh while pivoting right, which forces the opponent onto one leg. From here, he maintains the body lock and runs him down until he's able to finish the takedown. Here's Ashishoryu, one of the great modern day sumo champs, hitting the move on fellow sumo great Haruma Fuji. Brings the hips in and wins the inside position with his left leg, loads the hips and elevates the inside thigh while pivoting right, and forces the opponent onto one leg and into a horizontal posture where he can be easily off-balanced. Note that here, the pivot actually begins as the left leg steps inside and continues throughout the movement. Here's one by the legendary Hakuho. As the opponent drives in, Hakuho wins the inside position with his right leg, arches back and left, plus raises his right thigh to load the opponent's hips, then continues to elevate the opponent's thigh and pivots left to take the opponent feet to back. Right leg inside, loads the hips, right thigh elevates the opponent's thigh, rotates the opponent into a horizontal position, then pushes him to the ground. Now I want to switch to judo to see a few from Dash Dava. Once Dash Dava gets his grips, which are a left arm belt grip and a right side tricep grip, he steps inside, initiates the pivot, loads the hips in tandem with the thigh elevation, then contorts right as he continues the pivot. The result is a nearly 360-degree pivot and major hip elevation and rotation. In the beginning of this video, I talked about the four elements, the grip, the hip load up, the thigh elevation, and the pivot in sequential order. But as we see here, as well as in some of the previous examples, these elements, particularly the hip load up, thigh elevation, and pivot, can occur in different orders or simultaneously, depending on the specific sequence. Another one, step inside and initiate the pivot, load the hips while elevating the thigh, contort and continue to pivot right. Step inside and initiate the pivot, load the hips while elevating the thigh, contort and continue pivoting right. One last thing to note is that Dash Dava's tricep grip assists with the upper body rotation as he pivots through the throw. The last thing I want to touch on is using the front Uchimada to counter an opponent's outside leg hook. When this happens, the opponent is giving the thrower inside position, and due to the proximity of their hips, a great opportunity for a hip load up. Here, the thrower will grip up, initiate the pivot, load the hips while elevating the thigh, and contort and continue to pivot right as he rotates the opponent to his back. The opponent attacks an outside leg hook, and the thrower uses the inside leg position to elevate and rotate the opponent's hips while pivoting right. In this one, the thrower attempts an inside trip, the opponent counters with an outside leg hook, and the thrower pivots, loads the hips, elevates the thigh, and finishes the throw. I hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown. To close us out, check out this highlight of Mongolian wrestlers using the front Uchimada in traditional Mongolian folk wrestling.
За хэлцэндээ яг татаад баруун донцолгоноос шахаад яг хараа тэр за халаа тавьж байна. За тэр ингээд за зүүн золгосон. За хадацсан. Бүгөө эсрэг талаар золгож байгаа. Аа. За баруун донцолгоож хадацсан.
Нэрэлдээ шүүгийн дөрөвт шалгарлаа.
За хамгаалах тун хэцүү байсан даа рефторч өргөжлөө. Одоо энэ хараа цугцсан тал руугаа. Энэ одоо манай хангаа харцаг бол ерөөсө хоёр талдаа энэ барьц.